As Peggy said, my name is Thomas Healy, and I'm talking to you from New York City. It is, and as I'm talking, if you could just let me know where you are, so that I can get a sense of where everybody is. I'm in New York City. It's a beautiful spring evening here, and everything today looked beautiful and fresh. And there's a real sense of hope that things are starting to improve and get back to normal. First of all, I would like to thank you, everybody, for attending. And I'd also like to thank Tracy and Peggy and Catherine and Andy for organizing this event and helping us as teachers maintain and expand our professional community and our professional dialogue despite these very, very challenging times. So I would like to start our webinar with kind of a pop quiz. And this image represents a very famous English idiom, one that I hope is very relevant for our webinar today. We can see three people there. Maybe we can see a teacher and two students. It looks like they're standing in the rain, and there are interesting clouds over their heads. Can anybody, if you take a look at the clouds, can anybody imagine what this well-known English idiom is supposed to represent? Thank you very much, Kathleen. Every cloud has a silver lining. And I think that's going to be one of the themes, I hope, for the webinar this morning. After 1 year of, I don't know if this sounds relevant to you guys, but after 1 year of teaching on Zoom, I'm completely exhausted. You know, I've just finished physiotherapy because of like working on the computer and poor posture and repetitive stress from typing all of the time. But I can see that as we transition out of this really, really challenging era, that there are really important things that that we have learned as teachers, and that the students have learned as learners about how to use, you know, the digital environment more effectively in our language teaching and learning. And I think since the theme is moving on, as we move forward, as we move on, that we can carry these things into the future, and that this is the silver lining. And it would be a shame if we just went back to the old way when there are these things that we can now do so successfully. Does that make sense? It does, Joe. Hello, Joe. Nice to see you. It is totally exhausting. It's like everything takes twice as long. So between the time that I was invited, and thank you to Oxford for inviting me to present, I read the Learner Agency paper, and I think if you haven't read it yet, it is very, very inspiring. Many of the things we do already, I think, but this paper is inspiring because it really, really pushes, I think, us to consider how we can really train students so that they can take a lot more control over their learning. And so I found this really, really inspiring. So I kind of tweaked my presentation title from encouraging learner agency in the hybrid environment compared to just the communicative teaching and learning. And you pulled a mess. Yeah, you see this. I think this this resounds with everybody that it's tough, isn't it? So learner agency. So what I would like us to do is to continue our conversation about learner agency, and I know you've been doing that already. and to see how can we use these concepts in our own teaching. And some of them I think are quite challenging, like students creating their own content, etc., and figuring out ways in which we can do that meaningfully. I'd also then like to discuss some issues about teaching online and hybrid courses. And for example, how can we identify learner needs when they're so isolated? I had a class last semester, and only in the a 16-week course, and only in the last week did I realize that I was teaching identical twins. How is that possible? Because of this distance. You know, we may feel that it's close because we're all on the screen, but it isn't. It truly is distance learning. And then I'd like us to focus on the positive, the silver lining, which I think is these things that we've learned that we can carry forward. And then hopefully we'll have time for questions and answers. If we could just start with communicative language learning, what are some words that come to mind when you think about this? Like in terms of what we're trying to, interactive, exactly. Teacher talk, exactly, and trying to avoid it. Authentic and meaningful, exactly. So I put a paper on communicative language teaching into one of those, devices, those apps that look at the frequency of words. And I looked at the nouns and the adjectives, and they're very much the ones that we've been talking about in the chat. And a real, I think, important one is this notion of use, that we're really, really trying to ask students to use the language in authentic ways and to reduce our teacher talk. I did the same with the Oxford paper for learner agency, and this is what I came up with. Again, most of the nouns and the adjectives, and all of the ones from communicative language learning, they were present to all of those nouns, like independent and use. But the ones that really popped out are agency, control, management, and ownership. And to me, this is definitely a challenge, because I very much, have to kind of fight the tendency that I want to control everything. So I really feel inspired and encouraged to renew my efforts to guide my students to be more self-directed in their learning. And if I do that, then the work that I do with them in my class will live on as they leave my class and go out into the world. These are some items that I focused on when I was looking at that document, and all of these, there's about 20 of these various things relating to learner agency in the document, in the paper. And I am a teacher, and I also write materials for my class, and these are the ones that they're all pretty important and interesting, but these are the ones that I felt that I would really like to focus on. That learner agency is low when all of the activities are closed, when all of the content is derived from the course book, when everything is classroom based, and the teacher is the only person providing the guidance. And it's high when it's open-ended, when they generate their own content, and when a lot of the learning takes place outside of the classroom. But when I saw this, I was reflecting on my own experience of becoming a language teacher for the first time 30 years ago. And then, like, for example, project-based instruction was very, very big. And a lot of it was based on encouraging students to present their own content. But I found that a lot of the time didn't feel that myself that I was structured enough from what I was doing in terms of these kind of content-based courses. And I certainly know that it just seemed uncontrolled. So again, I'm sharing my prejudice, and and also at that time there was a big focus on task-based learning, and again where we were using authentic content with and trying to get students to grapple with that meaningfully, and not as a part of a course, but as the main thing. So I suppose that's the extreme end of students making their own content and dealing with open-ended activities. So what I felt was that I could conceive of this move to learner agency if we considered it from the point of view of, again, all of these things that we just mentioned as low, and then the things that are high, but that we don't go from low to high in a week. That what we want is a series of step-by-step scaffolded activities. Does that make sense? So we want to get here, but we're going to begin here. What comes to mind when you think of scaffolding? Look at this scaffolded house. It's under construction and it has all of this. Yes, it's support. It's temporary. It exists where and when we need it, and it's removed when it's no longer needed. And it allows us to do kind of complex things in a step-by-step way. So we have to scaffold our students, and I think that how do we scaffold language learning? That is absolutely right, Marianne, when the teacher only gives a little assistance and lets the students work independently. So that's when we've gone too much onto the other side. That is a great answer. So we can get there, but we can get there step by step, and then we remove the scaffolding when we can, and then oops, I just wanted to show in this slide that that every learner is individual, so that we remove the scaffolding bit by bit, but we don't remove it all at the same time because every learner has different needs. So I think in relation to course book selection and the materials that we develop ourselves in class, that we want to choose ones that provide this kind of step-by-step progression, a progression without major jumps, but with enough move forward so that they're encouraged to progress, and but by the time they get to the open-ended, fluent activities, that they're prepared for it and that they'll be successful. And this is something that I feel is particularly important for my Asian learners, giving them lots of success as they move forward, so that they don't feel overwhelmed and that they've plenty of opportunities for success along the way. So I would suggest this as a model for choosing, that this is a model for a lesson of a course or the unit of a book, and eventually the entire book. That we give them the tools that they need systematically, and then remove it at the and move step by step. As Peggy said, I'm a co-author of Smart Choice, and Smart Choice has 6 levels. One of the features is that one page is one lesson, and we'll see later that this is a kind of scaffolding. And we have extensive digital resources, which we'll discuss later. And I just wanted to go through this very briefly, just a couple of pages, just to see what step-by-step progression would mean in the context of, a lesson from a textbook. So so this is one page, and it's one lesson, and this is like between in the CEF. This is like A1, A2. So we're talking about quite basic. Okay, so the next images that I'm going to show are from this. So we start with a warm-up, and then we have this very remember now this is for basic level students, and then we start with this activity where basically it's just how the students just match the items with the words with the images. What percentage of these vocabulary items do you think your students know? 100%. 50%, 100%. So that's quite high. So what do you think the advantage is? What do you think it's a useful activity to give students an activity where their chance of success is so high? We would say that it is, because we want them to have success on every page, and every page is a lesson, so that even if it gets tricky for them towards the end of the page, at the end of the lesson, where it becomes more open-ended, that they will have a feeling of success. And if we have one page and one lesson, it means that there's frequent places where the sequence of activities is finishing, and then they're on to something again that is easy, and then we go through that progression as well. So exactly, Hiroko, without pressure. And we can spring from it from more complex items. We absolutely, Raffaella. And then we focus then on the pronunciation. How about the pronunciation? Can they pronounce this vocabulary? Can they pronounce this accurately? So can they pronounce it accurately from the point of view of standard English? Yeah. So when we look at so that's something that we're really going to focus on the accuracy of their pronunciation, and then we move on. So we've presented the items, we have helped them with the pronunciation, and then we have the next activity. What do you think the purpose of this activity is then? So basically they identify the items and focus on pronunciation, and then they complete the chart with the items from activity 1. Nadia, no, they can't all pronounce them, and so this is part of scaffolding, so that by the time they're actually asked to use the words, that they will they'll have had a chance to practice the pronunciation. Yeah, it's a writing skill, and it enforces how they're going to remember the words. And if they have a paper book, they will write it, and if on the digital book, they actually type it. And then we have the actual more open-ended activity. And at this stage, some learners will have success with this activity by just doing it in the context of what they've learned in this lesson, but others will be able to run with it. So students will be able to have success with it. We can also think of um, moving from kind of closed to open from the point of view of a kind of a horizontal progression. So for example, we can have other activities then where we can encourage students to go beyond the language in the text, and we're going to be looking at some ideas for this later. And we are going remember, these are the categories that they had to write. How might they expand that? So this is kind of pretty easy enough to expand because they mentioned their own foods. And here they kind of categorize them into meat and seafood. How might we kind of personalize that or expand that? Well, we could ask them, to generate other categories, like ask them what they eat for breakfast. Exactly, Nicholas. So we can think, we can conceive of this as moving from closed to open as we move through a series of activities, but also within the context of an activity itself. This is the second page in the unit, and again we have this progression where the language is clearly modeled, and it's they get to watch this language in a video, and they then so they have a very, very clear model of it, and then they in activity 2 they have a chance to see how they can substitute items that they learned previously into the dialogue, and then they can add their own. So again, the personalization and how it's going from controlled to more open is very gradual. And the final activity in this sequence, again, is a role play, and it's designed so that it can be used with students of different levels. Some students will follow closely what they have seen in the lesson, but others will be able to expand it. And in our teacher's guide, we give lots of suggestions about how teachers can assist the students, and actually often it's more the other way around, about how to actually record their dialogue. How might we use this recording? Imagine you have two students and they make a recording of themselves doing a kind of a role play. It's a very, very useful thing to have then, because a lot of the time what we do in the classroom, if it's done live, it's lost. But now we actually have a record of it, and we can use that for all kinds of purposes if we know how to share it. They can self-access, and there's a way that we can access it as well to offer them assistance, to intervene, to help with pronunciation. So remember, the second thing on the list there that I had of the 4 things that I was going to focus on from the learner agency paper was students creating their own content. One of the silver linings that we have is that even students, even my colleagues who don't like to use technology, have become technical experts. And in this environment, they have really now, after a year, become used to using almost everything. And they have become expert. And I think that when we move into a hybrid situation, and then when we move into the what if we move back into a world where, um, like pre 2020, then I think it would be a mistake to go to neglect this kind of teaching, the using digital devices that we've all become so familiar with. So for example, if you think of that warm-up activity where students are asked to describe the food that they like, one activity that I like to do is to have students do something as soon as to encourage them to actually come on camera. So that activity was, what food do you like? So in this case, we would just ask the learners to change their screen background to their favorite food. And this gives us something that we can discuss right away. And here we are, right away getting students involved in content creation. Well, I see your comment, Bitta, about students' access to the technology required, and I'm really tonight looking at this from the point of view of my own experience of teaching with students who do have technology, because we've been teaching them on Zoom for the last year. So here's maybe a progression. So remember, we were saying that for the second activity, it would be, well, how could you kind of expand that? So in chat, I could ask the class to produce photos and then do a screen share of what they of their favorite food and of their breakfasts. But this is still teacher controlled. But the one here on the right, I think, is really taking it to a new level, and this is when we do that kind of activity that we might have done on Zoom, on social media. And in this case, the learner has provided a photo, and the student has responded with a video. And now, remember, one of the things that we're trying to achieve from the point of view of learner agency is learning taking place beyond the classroom. These are still shots from a video that my student made in a restaurant in Indonesia, and in many, certainly my students, many of them live in large metropolitan areas, and there's literally English everywhere. So I asked them, we couldn't do it in New York because they're not here, asked them to go out and find their favorite food. And I just wanted to show you that this is from a menu in Jakarta, and just on this one page alone, these are the items that had been presented already in the student book. So I think that we can, through these little projects, ask students to go out and forge those links between what they're learning in class and in the real world. And what tends to happen, if we do this on social media, is that it becomes viral. Now, I'm not asking students, and I'm hoping that they're not going to do something like the Ice Bucket Challenge. But if we encourage students to do this, it can take a life of its own. Not alone do they just respond to things that I ask them to do, but they generate their own content themselves and their own discussions themselves. And this becomes a shared digital space. And in my experience of doing this, it becomes a community. And they ask questions. So if a student asks me a question and I don't get back to them in time, often I find that others are responding in this kind of learning community that the students are developing in a social media environment. And the advantage as well is that it's very much something that the learner can do independently. And we're talking about being able to address speaking, listening, reading and writing. And I have been using the things that are recorded for error analysis. I just wanted to point out um, the additional practice and additional resources in our digital learning components. And these very, very dark photos are just photos that I took of my own phone. And this is the online resources for Smart Choice that have been optimized for mobile use. And there's all kinds of opportunities for practice. And the dictionary is very, very useful as well. There's all kinds of optional additional practice for students. And I think the previous presenter presented this as well, but there's this fabulous thing that there are these additional activities that the learners can do, that the teacher gets a report and sees how they did, and can ask them to do it again and sees how many times they attempted it. And I think being able to assess our students like this and being able to have a record of them using the language, which we can refer to again, helps us identify their individual needs. And if we think about a lesson that, you know, for example, at the start of that lesson, here we have our learners. And then, you know, we have our lesson, we have our practice, we have our assessment, and then we find that maybe right away we have learners who need more help. Some are fine. And one of the things that that we can do then, if we have additional materials in the digital space, is have different learners do different things. And there's a question there about synchronous versus asynchronous materials. So, for example, I have additional asynchronous materials, videos that I put on their learning management system. And so I can ask individual students to do this, and I can, and then maybe ask some other students who, you know, who are a little bit more able to comprehend the lesson that I'm teaching to do something else. And maybe some students don't have to do anything at all. I will ask them to do something entirely different or nothing. So I think having that record, the ability to be able to see their results from the activities that the additional activities that they do online, and to be able to analyze what they are doing in terms of the content that they post to the LMS too, but also to a social media platform, I think are very, very useful in identifying these needs. Armina has an interesting answer. I wonder if somebody could answer that. When we go back into the hybrid environment, we've been used now to all of these things. And this is a huge silver lining, I think, for us. The learners have become used to using these tools in actual language learning. And I'm just hoping that that when I go back to class, I'm not going to forget, you know, how I use the LMS more than ever, and how I ask so many students to do various digital things, which I was able to use again, in terms of being able to assess their language level. But it's one of the issues that we are facing when we go back to hybrid teaching is the fact that that some of the classes that we will be using will not be technology classes because there's only a certain amount of students left. But I think that the tools that we've been using in the online environment are the ones that are going to help us continue to do these things successfully in the hybrid environment. So in this particular case, you know, I have computers in this class and a projector, and it's going to be relatively easy to do, um, you know, the kinds of things that that I would use a projector for example. Um, but look, in the photo on the right, even if we don't have a digital classroom, and we want a student to, for example, take a photograph of their work and share it to everybody, we don't even need a projector. They can do that. They can stream it. They can stream it on Zoom, or they can upload a picture to the LMS, or they can do it on social media. So in a sense, every classroom can become a high-tech classroom if they just bring their device. Now I would like to talk very briefly about another thing that I learned. Uh, Here we have the old world, and you know, teachers were fabulous because we can focus on, you know, for example, the group on the right, and we still know what's happening with the group on the left because we have 6 pairs of eyes and 10 pairs of ears. And it's very easy for us to be able to identify when, you know, when students need more help. Even when we're focusing on a single individual. But I have had so many experiences, certainly in the beginning, of going into a Zoom breakout room and finding nothing but silence. And what I have determined that too often, to be honest, it's not that my learners are reluctant, but it had to do with how I set it up. And I think that's been a big kind of lesson. My classroom management skills, that I didn't set it up properly. And what I have started to do is to use this kind of model online, where I will do something, I really model it, and then we'll have the class model it together, and then they will do it individually or in groups. So I suppose what I'm saying is that it may seem odd to talk about so much modeling in the context of learner agency, but what I would say is that that learner agency, that ultimate outcome of being more self-directed is better served if I present it and prepare it more successfully. So here we have the new normal. And what I would say is that more than ever, a learning management system has become crucial to my teaching, and I'm going to continue to do it. That I have loved on Zoom being able to focus in on what a particular learner is doing and being able to share it with class, and I will be continue to be able to use digital devices to be able to do that too. So, any questions and any discussion? So the silver linings. What are the silver linings for you in terms of what you've learned or experienced during this time that you hope to continue with in the future? So, Nicholas, I have had teaching, I have taught small classes, and here's a solution that has worked for me. If I go into the breakout, I would put them into breakout rooms on Zoom, and I ask them to record what they're doing. And I cannot then look at a recording of every breakout room, but I can look at a recording of a few of them. And I have found that, so I asked them to record their breakout room and to upload it to our learning management system. and then all of the breakout rooms. And then I can selectively go in and look at and see later on what they're doing. And I have found that the knowledge that this can happen and is something that has made them far more productive in their breakout rooms. I know that in some environments, grades are not necessarily so important, and that there are teachers who are in the kind of pass-fail courses. What I have done is I've really upped the participation and participation grade of my entire course, and um, and the recording of what they're doing in their private breakout room is something that you might consider, Nicholas. There may be a recording, Nicholas, of a webinar that I did, including ideas for how to assess it. This notion of having students record themselves in Zoom, even if you can only check a couple of those sessions every week. So thank you very much for your participation, and I got wholly engrossed in what I was saying, and I think I didn't follow the chat enough. Um, so my apologies for that. So again, my time is up. I would just like to thank to OUP so much for providing us with the opportunity to share ideas and to interact with each other like this. Being isolated from other teachers and from my community and from my colleagues is a very hard thing to do, to experience for this length of time. And I'm very grateful to everybody for showing up and giving us a sense of, you know, what a fabulous community that we are. So when the pandemic is over, I'm going to come and I'm going to sleep on every single one of your sofas as I tour the world.